hopper in the scullery. That had taken 6 buckets of water. Then she'd put the whites in to soak while she popped up the road to the shop. She caught sight of the lady's gloved hands and felt her roughed, cracked knuckles. It made her want to cry, having her hands in such a terrible state. But her mother had told her time and time again there was no shame in bearing the marks of a hard day's work. It was just that she dreaded the arrival of winter, when the keens would crack and bleed, and she'd spend every night with her swollen fingers coated in lanolin to try to soothe them, or dunking them in warm, salty water to stop them getting infected. The 2 ladies stopped twittering away to each other like a pair of linnets and looked her up and down. The toes of their polished boots were just peeking out of their long skirts, and the pure white lace collars of their blouses sat perfectly against their slender throats. One had a watch on a beautiful gold chain around her neck, and the other had a beautiful amethyst brooch pinned to the lapel of her fur-tipped coat. Annie met their gaze, just as her mother had taught her. She fumbled to do up the buttons on her cardigan, to make herself look as smart as she could. Her long chestnut hair hung in loose bunches secured by ribbons, and her blunt fringe was the work of her mum's scissors. They'd probably noticed that her black woolen pinafore had seen better days, and the collar of her blouse was fraying. But at least it was bleached and starched nicely. She had come here to do some shopping, just like them, and her money was as good as anybody else's. Annie made a great show of undoing the clasp on her purse. There was no handbag, she couldn't afford one of those. But she had worked hard for her purse, which was getting a little worn now. The women watched her intently as she chose 2 apples, and the greengrocer slipped them into a little brown paper bag for her. "Nice morning, Annie. Bet you're running a bit late today, aren't you?" She shuffled her feet a bit, trying to hide her impatience as he weighed out a small brown loaf and popped a couple of tiny little rolls on the scales too. The make-weights were the best bit, because she liked to munch on one of those on the way back home, even though they were half stale, like the bread. That was how the shops had to sell it, with the war on. It was supposed to stop people eating too much. Her stepdad, Bill, hated the bread these days anyway, because it was made of brown flour, which played havoc with his insides. That meant there was more left for everyone else, which was a blessing. She needed to get up to the butcher's to get some liver for his tea, or she'd never hear the end of it, but it was already gone 8 o'clock. She tried to nip back up the road in her lunch break and pray to God that Bill didn't give her a thick ear for good measure. There was just so much more to do these days, with Mum expecting again. It made Annie's stomach lurch to see Mum heaving that great bump around in front of her as she made her way down the steep staircase to head out to work. There was no banister for her to cling on to. The bedroom doors on either side opened straight onto the stairs, which led down to a thin, dark passageway into the scullery. "This baby was going to be bigger than the last one, you mark my words." That's what Nanny Chick said. There would be 6 of them in the house once the baby came. At least they didn't have to share with another family, like so many of her friends did, because that only led to fights over who was going to use the copper on wash days and who was spending too long in the lavvy in the yard. Clutching her shopping tightly in its brown paper bag, Annie ran as fast as she could back down Acton Lane, under the railway arch and down her street, Fletcher Road, to deliver the shopping back home to Nanny Chick. Then she was off again, scampering along Beaumont Road, past the carts which were already delivering their loads from the big houses up in Holland Park, with laundry hands heaving wicker hampers off the back, while the blinkered horses stood idle. There were shouts of "Mornin'" as she darted past, while a couple of housewives stood on their steps, arms folded, watching her. It would give them something to gossip about later. It seemed the whole terrace had been enveloped in some strange fog which had seeped through the letterboxes and steamed up the windows. Annie knew the temperature inside those houses would be rising, forcing sweat from the brows of the washerwomen. But the rule was to keep the windows tightly closed to make